All right, everyone. Welcome to the newest episode of the Irish Iron Podcast. This is episode 4. Yeah, episode 4
Yeah,
with Ross Byrne. How are you feeling, Ross?
good man. Thanks very much for having me. Honestly, it's an absolute pleasure to be on. Really looking forward to having a chat. Much loved. And I suppose it breaks the paradigm of doing absolutely nothing over the
Yeah,
next couple of weeks. So I know, but all serious, man. Thanks very much for having me. Honestly,
savage, man, savage, man. So for anyone who's listening, Ross and me go a couple of years back. It's around 3 years back. I was kind of made aware of him when he was competing in his first show under Larry Doyle in 2017 or 2018. But
2018.
I was made aware back then. I didn't realize he was a coach. I didn't know what his self story was. But then I kind of got closer to him. I kind of understood where he's coming from. And what I find great is Ross has a very he reaches a broad audience. He's very smart, intelligent with his methodology, and he kind of bridges the gap between old school and new school, and I find that very interesting.
I like that.
My whole point, my whole point with this podcast is to get um, his opinion on things. So I'm going to ask a few questions, but basically I want to hear your story as well. So we're going to tie it in. So what got you into weight training, Ross? Like what was your kind of origin point into that?
Yeah. So back when I was really young, about 8 or 9, I got into traditional martial arts as a kid, and I ended up doing that at a really high level for about 12 or 13 years when I was like 6 or 7 the whole way up until my late teens. And while I was doing that, a lot of kind of traditional martial arts is all about movement. A lot of it is about kind of understanding what you're doing, where you're going, and that kind of opened the floodgates for me to try and kind of get all understanding as to, okay, why am I moving this way compared to this person moving that way? What's going to allow me to move faster in a fight? What's going to allow me to move faster within this competition? And stuff like that kind of opened up the floodgates as to different kind of individualities with inter individualities with kind of movement patterns and stuff like that. So from there, I ended up kind of getting a relative interest, and I still hadn't really kind of sunk my teeth into the idea of working on as a professional level. Got into training at about 16 while training for martial arts, just kind of lumping weights around and not really understanding what I was doing at that stage, and not really understanding the tie-in that they had. And eventually then I would kind of hung the gi up, if you will, after doing martial arts, and I was kind of left not really knowing what to do. And I said, you know what, I'm going to give this training thing a shot. And again, it wasn't so much about me looking for it as a career. At that stage, I was actually looking to do my leaving cert, and funny enough, I had every aspiration to be an English teacher, would you believe, of all
The
things.
same
That was
same
my
as me,
original
man.
goal.
Same as me. I'm
English and history.
English and
I
geography
was
for
going
me, man.
home. Yeah.
So
I was going home about being a teacher, and then I had a bereavement when I was doing my leaving cert, and then it kind of pushed me out of the whole exam frame of mind. And after that, I had a guidance counselor, a really nice fellow, Mr. McLaughlin. He was like, here, why don't you go and even just kind of bridge the gap for a while, just bridge that year that you have, go do a certification, go get a qualification, something that you're interested in. I said, you know what, I'll go and do personal training. And I actually went to Biffy in Bray. And I don't know if there's anyone from Biffy watching this, but fucking hell, what a shithole. It is not even the place, it's just the year that I spent there, which it wasn't really. But within that year, I realized, okay, this is definitely what I want to do, but this isn't how I want to do it. And that's kind of what started me doing my own research, getting into my own kind of thing, and kind of delving into different things that I was interested in. So from there, it all just kind of went and snowballed from there, and I got really into research. I started working under really high level names pretty much from the get-go.
yeah.
And just everything snowballed from there. Even up until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was still kind of really trying to find my feet with where I have my interest, and then I found bodybuilding. And ever since then, a lot of where my interests come from the scientific end, from the mechanics end, has been based around, okay, how can I build the most amount of muscle, and how can I do that for the longest I possibly can do it for? And that's kind of where that's come from, and trying to get understanding of both the mechanics and the things, the physiology and the things. And then from there, I started to realize how those things are very much relevant to your everyday person. Why having an understanding of hypertrophy, and a very good understanding of hypertrophy, the processes, the application, is important for any client that you have, any person that you come across. And then obviously, based off what we're going to talk about here, Irish Iron, trying to build tissue and trying to be a high level competitor, that kind of way. I realized very early on that I'm not the most genetically gifted guy on the planet, and that if I'm ever going to try and build something impressive, even for myself, well,
Yeah, are you?
oh, sorry, something just jumped off there, buddy. My own camera there. There we go. Jesus, I thought I closed off. I was a bit of a rant there. But yeah, I suppose I just, from very early on, I realised when I got into the industry that I don't know enough to be very good at this.
Right.
You know, and it all kind of went from there. And I was very, very lucky to find Larry very, very early on in my career, very, very early on. And it went from just kind of tit for tat kind of stuff on Instagram, just kind of chatting to each other through messages. And then when I decided to do my first show, I went with Lar, and it was through the process of kind of getting into my first show, getting into training that way, that I started to kind of realize the real value in education, the real value in getting a hold of different things and being able to kind of get better over time. And as I said, it just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah.
Since then, I've done more courses than I can think of. I've done so many different mentorships. I've worked under loads of different names, and I just love it. I love everything about it. You know, I love training. I love thinking about training. I love thinking about other people's training. I love the process of building muscle. I love the relevance of building muscle to everyone. I love finding different things that we can understand about how we put on tissue and how someone else puts on tissue, and potentially how is that relevant to Mr. Olympia and how is that relevant to Agnes down the road? Why are these two things important for the two very, very different people? And it's through that then where a lot of my interest kind of lies now, and understanding all that kind of thing. And then obviously bodybuilding is my own kind of personal love, and I have my own aspirations there as well. I suppose that's a very brief introduction.
No, that's great, man. Because I'd be very much of the same opinion. Like, look, I've been a meathead. You know, people who know me know my story. I was one of the best juniors when I was 18 years old. Took a step back for a couple of years, personal reasons, and then came back to it. And my God, did I have an ego? And it's only been recently that I've dropped the ego. And I'd say after my competitions, I was kind of like, okay, I need to step back, evaluate things, and have a look at things, and get a bit more of a knowledge base. And what I found very interesting about the way you've done it is you've gone the education route. I mean, a lot of personal trainers will get their cert and then they'll go straight into the coaching people, and it'll kind of be gung-ho. Like, I mean, if they're presented with a problem that's a bit more specific to somebody, like a biomechanical problem or someone with diabetes or something like that, they wouldn't really know what to do. But I think education's the best way forward. It really is. I mean, not everybody can be genetic.
Yeah, 100%. I think the relevance of education is kind of showing itself more and more now. I think as we kind of get into the age of where social media is the dominant element within training practices and within coaching practices, it very much highlights if you're not kind of keeping up with the rat race as far as education goes and as far as being aware of how you're going to coach just about anyone who could jump out in front of you, you are eventually going to get lost in it. And that's why I'm constantly saying to new coaches and people who get into the industry and new trainers, just like, do not be afraid and do not be in any way unsure of the fact that you need to not only invest your time but your money into education. You know, and it can be hard because you make fuck all money as a trainer initially anyway. You know, I think we all know, anyone who's watching this as a coach, know that you're clutching at straws the whole time that you're kind of initially in the industry. And even I have weeks where I'm clutching at straws, you know, and I'm in this years. I'm doing this a long time. I'm doing this since 17 or 18, you know, and it's an interesting one that we now kind of have this resurgence in the value of education, which is a really, really good thing, you know. And then the other side of that, you have the argumentative idea back.
Yeah, I mean, you had a seminar ready to go, man. I mean, like.
Yeah, I must say, I suppose a shameless plug is probably something worth saying. So originally, the seminar was actually supposed to be last weekend. So it's muscle for the masses. A good play on words, I think. And muscle for the masses is an exploration of the validity and application of hypertrophy. And basically, the idea behind the weekend is to explore hypertrophy on a very, very in-depth level. And kind of from that, understand the application, the mechanics end of it, the physiology end of it, and kind of why does that apply to you, the meathead who has high aspirations as a bodybuilder, as an athlete, just as much as it applies to, as I said, Agnes down the road, who's potentially dealing with some kind of muscle loss, like muscle-related age-related muscle loss. And why is it important for both of you guys to think about the same thing? You know, and that's kind of where the idea comes from and what we're thinking about it. So it's called sarcopenia, would be the kind of age-related muscle loss. And why is that important for somebody dealing with that as much as it is for you who's trying to put on 20, 30 pounds in an off-season in order to try and get his pro card? Like, why do you guys need to think of the same things at times? And then the other side of it, we're looking at why you need to think about different things. And then that's the kind of the general basis behind it. And ideally to have a really, really good time doing it. There's also 2 practical days. So we have the theory end of the day, which is going to be the initial end. And then the last end of the day is going to be practical time on the floor. And then that happens the same on the second day. So it's going to be on a Saturday and a Sunday on a date that I can't confirm with you yet because of all this that's going on. But most of the tickets are already sold, which was pretty crazy. I expected all the tickets to sell out in maybe a month or 2. They sold out in like 4 or 5 hours. So that was a really, really cool thing. But if anyone is interested in that, you can go onto my Instagram, click in the bio, have a little look at what we're going to talk about. And if you have any questions before you want to buy a ticket, just let me know. And they're super cheap at the moment as well. Like they're only like 50 quid for the weekend. So that's pretty nuts as well for someone to do a seminar. But for me, it's about getting people in the door. It's not about making exponential amounts of money off it. That's not what it is for me. It's about showing new trainers, old trainers, meatheads, just the value in education and the value in understanding. So the financial return on my end isn't all that big of a deal for me. Hence why it's a little bit cheaper. But that doesn't going to take away from the value. Hopefully.
Deadly man. Like I see, like you'd have most of your clients. Would it mainly be online for you, or would it be one-on-one?
Predominantly now, yeah. So like it just kind of happened very naturally for me, and it all kind of moved online. Eventually, I decided. Now I done an awful lot of time on the floor. Like I've done stupid hours when I first started. When I first started coaching, I was thrown into it. Like it wasn't kind of like this progressive. And like I'm glad I was thrown into it. Like I'm glad I didn't have this kind of gradual. Like I was thrown into the 40, 50, 60 hour weeks. And it was just happened. So I was getting up at like 4:30 in the morning, and I'd be in the gym for 5:30. And if I wasn't up at 4:30, I'd be up at 3:30. I'd do an hour's reading beforehand. I'd be in the gym at 5:30. I'd coach on the floor from 5:30 till about 12 or 12:30. I'd sleep on the gym floor for an hour, and then I'd train, and then I might come home, catch some food, go back down, and then train people again till 9 or 9:30. And then I'd do that 5 or 6 days a week.
Yeah.
But I loved it. Oh man, I loved waking up every morning. There was something about me just jumping out of bed, and I was just like, okay, let's go. And I had this, like, I even get goosebumps thinking about it now, man. Like, I love it so much, and I loved it from that moment on, and I've never not been excited for it. So I ended up doing, I think before I went online, I had done something like 12 or 13,000 hours on the floor or something, if not more. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to build a very, very small online basis when I go and start. And I kind of started very, very, like, kind of acutely a couple of years back, but it was nothing to write home about. It wasn't the way I have it now. And then I think it was about a year ago that I decided to go, you know what, let's just go for this. Let's go for it. So I did. I went and I got a space in Southside Strength and Fitness. I was like, I'm still going to have an online basis, but also keep the one-to-one, because I love training people one-to-one. Set it up there, and it just kind of grew from there, And now I'm very lucky to look after people who have goals that really align with what I love to think about and what I love to do, and a really, really loyal group of clients. It's not easy, but I'm kind of getting into the prep space now as well, which is cool. I had a guy on prep and a girl on prep, but obviously they had to get pulled very early. But man, it's been good. It's been a cool kind of natural progression into that space, and I've really enjoyed it.
I think what you'll find about prepping people, on my end, I'm not naming names now, just out of respect for themselves, but obviously it went sour. I prepped them both, and it came to a position where it can either go very well for you as a coach, or, because the thing is, when you're doing, this is what I found, when you're helping people who aren't focused on a show, they're going to be just happy to get any form of result, be a little bit of strength gain, a little bit of fat loss, whatever, feeling better. But when you're prepping somebody, it's a different animal, man. It's like I prepped 2 men's physique guys, and I later found out, I kind of knew they weren't following it, but I'm too like, I didn't know back then. I was kind of like, oh geez, I have to push them a little bit harder, and I'd push them the way I pushed me. And I got to the point where at the end of the day, I found out they stopped about halfway through, and they were still saying they were following my plan, but then afterwards, no, we stopped. But the way you're going about it, it's a lot better. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I was like, no, I've no sense of that. Like, I've the nutrient. I knew how to get.
That's an admirable thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, man, for me, I just apply the same practices I always do to someone when I was prepping them. Obviously, it's a little bit more kind of on the more kind of extreme end, in the sense that they don't really have the wiggle room that somebody in everyday life would have, But like, I'm very much data orientated, so I track an awful lot of data about these people. So I'm tracking obviously their food and their nutrition data, your sleep, your stress, recovery, menstrual cycle if you're a female, different elements within the kind of your daily life that are going to be very, very important to understand everything else. So if one thing I can actually say to any coach who's going to get into it is begin to track data as quickly as you can. You don't need to go into the point where I'm going. Like I'm going into everything. Like I'm nearly in the bed with them. You know, that kind of way. Like it's that kind of element I go into with some of them because it's kind of what the service calls for. It's what they sign up for. You know, I think again, depending on the person, I pull back on the amount of data that I come back off. You know, that kind of way. But a lot of people who I'm serving now, they rely on me tracking on that data for me to give them the service that I'm offering. So I think that understanding how complex the body is in a physiological sense when it comes to competition prep, that data is the most valuable thing you can have to make that process smooth. 100%. Because it gives you the relevance and the understanding to make changes that need to be made or to understand maybe negative biofeedback that you're getting. Like if you're getting extreme fatigue like super early on, that's a sign where you're like, okay, what's going on here? You know, and you might be able to relay it back to the data that you've been taking within these different kind of spreadsheets or whatever, or maybe you're tracking it through things like an Oura ring or an Apple Watch or something like that, and you kind of become an investigator, so to speak. You know, you connect the dots as to why you're getting these things kind of brought back in your face, and that's kind of what the basis of my practice has definitely been. And I had a really successful prep with one of my men's physique guys. He won't mind me naming his name, Connor Healy. And then obviously just push came to shove with all this. He had to pull out, but he was set to do really, really well. But he'll tell you himself, his prep was a breeze. You know, we kept his calories super high, but it's because we understood what was going on and the relevant changes that needed to be made. It could be made outside of just net calories. It could be made just outside of kind of net cardio. We were able to kind of get a hold of what was going on a kind of overall basis and make that process smooth. You know, so I suppose that practice is still kind of applied to all my other clients as well. But it's definitely a different animal, as you say. Prep is most definitely a different animal.
I love it. Like, don't get me wrong now, I loved it. But like the thing is that like I'll go back to what you said earlier. Like feedback is so important on both sides of the story. If a client's not giving you any feedback, so those two clients didn't give me any feedback. So I thought it was all good. They didn't give, it was like getting water from a stone. So going forward, I was prepping one fella for the October shows. He had to pull out, and I just said, well, just go for spring. But this, like, it's a different animal when somebody texts you every day and they're saying, oh, I feel this, 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 and this. And I'm like, that's almost too much information, but I'd rather have too much information than nothing. Because at least that way, you know how they're feeling, you know, like I think the utmost importance, if I was to help somebody now, I wouldn't prep men's physique guys anymore. That's just my own personal bias. I wouldn't prep women. I would only prep my niche. But that being said, as my role as a coach, I just want to help the everyday, you know, Joe and Mary. I'm not here to.
Yeah, like when you're funny, man, that's where you'll get the most value. You know, I think when people often think about, oh, I want to get into helping the athlete, or I want to get into helping the bodybuilder or the guy doing the photo shoot, but the actual value that you get when you help just an everyday person, like, you know, I think it's very cliche and you hear it all the time, but literally allowing somebody to play with their children a little bit more, or allowing somebody to go on a walk that they weren't able to go on a couple of years ago, or pick up just like even like not run their back out when they just go and pick up something off the floor, you know, different things like that. Showing people the value in health and fitness, I think, is kind of the most, you know, sentimental thing you can do as a coach, and the most sentimental thing and the most sentimental feeling you'll have. You know, I say to people all the time that obviously I'm not as experienced in it at the moment, but kind of on the outside looking in, a lot of the time prepping people can be relatively easy because, you know, a lot of the time if they're doing it right, they're going to be quite robotic with it. You know, like if you get somebody who's really into it, they're just going to follow the plan, whatever it is that you give them. And I think this is why you often see bad coaching practices leak into competition prepping, because they'll just follow blindly because they're robots. They just want that goal, you know. And I think that's where we start to see kind of poor practice leak in. And it's where we see, although, yeah, you might go and you might look great on a show, you might win, you might not win, but like, how's your health at the end of it? You know, that kind of way. Little different things that we need to understand like that. And that's not worth getting into because I'm not here to speak on anyone else's coaching practice. I'm here to speak on my own. And so far, so good, you know. It's enjoying it.
So, like, regards to training aspect of things, like we'll do the nutrition.
Yeah, this is probably why I'm here.
So the training side of things, like what I've observed from now, I've started, like, I'd use certain things, like from my own experience, like I'd use bands on the hack squat, I'd use bands on the leg press. I would do certain things just to alleviate certain things with my knees and various things. Like I found, like, including them, I make them harder. Like I'd make certain things harder, or I'd just take that little bit of pressure off at certain ends of the movement.
Yeah.
But then the whole exercise itself, I've been able to perform better. Would that be your whole thing? It's like, don't get someone to squat if they don't need to squat. Like,
Yes, so they're kind of two separate animals as far as kind of people. So we'll start with someone's suitability to an exercise, because I suppose it's a good way to work its way in. So we're all very much built differently. Right? So anatomically, we all have very, very different movement patterns, and the sooner that we all realize that, the more we actually open up the floodgates to progressions as far as exercise goes. So your range at the hip is going to be different to my range at the hip potentially. Okay, we could, out of some miraculous idea, have the same range at the hip. Okay, that's neither here nor there. Now, understanding that as well, we also need to understand that we can change our available range. So sometimes we have more range than we do. Sometimes we just have that, and that's about all we have. And that's just an anatomical thing. Like, if you only have a certain amount of range at the hip, then that's all the range you have, and you're never going to have any more. And using some kind of external load to force yourself into any extra range is only going to do you more harm than good in the long run. So where that applies to other exercises are things like dumbbell presses is a really big one. And even I've had very polite discussions and good debates with yourself about kind of using fullest kinds of ranges, and not understand, maybe misunderstandings of the idea of active range and misunderstandings of the idea of available ranges. So what we're looking at here is, let's say we have somebody, okay, let's just say theoretically we have Jim over here, right? And Jim is 6'5". Jim has super long arms and super long legs, right? And then we have Onvai, who's what, 5'8", same as me. Kind of way, but yeah, 5'5". A smaller arm span, far smaller arm span, and a shitload of muscle bulk on his actual arm. All right. Yeah. Your available range as far as where you can go and you can kind of actively control the tissues around the chest are going to allow for a lot more of a kind of almost a deeper looking range than Jim over here, whose arms are so long that the amount of tissue that he's taken up and the amount of range availability that he has based off his limb length is going to seem like he's not touching the dumbbells off his chest. Those kind of arbitrary rules are so dated, and they need to go. They need to disappear, because they're not only harming normal people, they're harming bodybuilders. They're harming high-level athletes. And obviously it's very hard to have a 23, 24-year-old try and tell you, as a 20 years of experience bodybuilder, maybe it's not a good idea to touch your chest as much in a dumbbell press, dependent. Sometimes you may need to actually go on a decline in order to give yourself more range. But there's so many different variables that dictate what range you should use, that it's imperative that I would just, and you don't need to understand them like I understand them, but having a relative awareness of them is quite important. So things like understanding that for you, where you've got a lot more tissue than I do. Now, granted, you've been bodybuilding a hell of a lot longer than I have. So your actual muscle bulk on your arm, right? So even with the muscle bulk on your upper arm here is going to give the impression that you're actually going deeper than you are. Yeah. But in reality, your upper arm bones and your scapula are within the same plane. Yeah. So for somebody looking from the outside in, it's like Owen is using perfect range, but for some reason Jim isn't. Although the actual range that you're using kind of comparatively is relatively the same. Then you might have things like you might actually have tight muscles. Now, generally muscles aren't tight, okay? They're kind of, there's instabilities within tissues and stuff like that. They're not really tight, so to speak. They're more kind of, there's something around that tissue's girdle that's telling your brain, I don't want to go into that available range because it's not safe for me right now. So a lot of the time you'll have bodybuilders complain of things like shoulder impingements. You'll have them complain of when they press, they get that really sharp pain coming across the top part of their shoulder. Things like that. And a lot of the time when you investigate that down, you find that the issue is likely going to be things like instability on the shoulder girdle. So the kind of external and internal rotators of the shoulder, which kind of move your arm this way. But although these don't seem like exercises that are important for a bodybuilder, they're incredibly important, because what they're doing is they're stopping your arm doing this when you're doing a dumbbell press. They're stabilizing that tissue. So what's happening is, if you can't stabilize those tissues, something else has to work to stabilize that tissue. So oftentimes it's the bicep tendon, and then you start getting that pain in the shoulder, and then you have a physio telling you, oh, you've got tight chest, you've got tight pecs, oh, your traps are wrong and your glutes aren't firing, when all that isn't really the case, and that's kind of where a lot of my disparity with some physios would come, because a lot of the time it's not that they're not aware, but it's a conflict of awareness, different things. Yeah. And I suppose that's a really brief introduction into why people need to understand that range is important, and understanding what active range is a vital component to training, not only safely, optimally, but for the long term. So with that said,
every
passive range.
every injury I've had, man, has been from it's been my fucking chest. It's been
Yeah,
now it's just been stupidity. But like I would like I've been very lucky with my upper body. I can kind of do what I do, but I've had to change things for my leg training entirely.
yeah.
Like I'd be a great squatter, but again, ass to grass is so. I don't believe that. I think it's a load of horse. I think it's a load of pony.
Yeah.
It's
Well, the thing is, it's gonna be pony for. It might be pony for you, but it might not be pony for me, or it might not be pony for
yeah,
X.
yeah,
It's so range rules are very arbitrary ideas. The only people who need to squat ass to grass, touch their chest, and pull the deadlift off the floor are powerlifters,
yeah,
because it's a rule within their sport. They're the
yeah.
only people who have to do it.
They have
All
to.
right, they have to do it. But if you don't have the available ranges in order to perform that movement, now understand that when I say you don't have the available range, that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't ever go into passive ranges. Sometimes passive ranges, because passive ranges are still indicative of hypertrophy responses. So
Yeah,
passive range would be a range whereby if you think about if you think about that feeling, like if you're doing like a dumbbell, do you know that feeling where you know the dumbbell is pushing you down? That would be
yeah,
a passive range.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
that would be conducive, still be conducive to hypertrophy. It would. But what happens is what we need to understand is that over the long term, you need to be aware that you're not really built to do that under that much load all the time.
No,
And that's where we start to see these really poor negative drawbacks. And that doesn't necessarily mean you train like a pussy. Like, and you know how I train. I don't train like a pussy. I train my fucking ass off.
yeah,
Always have, always will. I train like an animal on the best of times. And the reason I try, I guess for me, it's about bridging the gap between training smart and training hard, because they're not on two separate camps. They're the same thing, that kind of way. Um, and then getting kind of onto it again, if we look at things like the lower body, so like a barbell squat. Okay, so we know that the barbell squat's kind of unsuitability to somebody else. A lot of it comes from that ass to grass idea. If you're forcing somebody who doesn't have that available range to go ass to grass, that's where you start to get this idea. Okay, maybe that's not a good idea for them. Maybe they don't have the range at the hip in order to pull that hip into flexion enough. And then at the same time, the combination of hip flexion, which is that bend of the hip backwards, and knee flexion, which is the bend of the knee, the combination of those two just don't add up to allow this guy to get ass to grass. But then you throw a barbell on his back and he's able to do it. That's telling you something. That's telling you that, okay, maybe it's a better idea to maybe pull back, get an idea of if is this really an exercise that he has to do, or can we find ways around this? Because your body doesn't know exercises. It knows force and it knows torque. That's what it knows. And it's an understanding of that and an understanding of the application of those ideas that kind of build the basis of what I do. But they all sound like really complicated ideas. They all sound like real ideas that are kind of negating that old school, just go for it vibe. But that's not what I do. That's not what I do. I try to make sure I'm building exercises that allow me to keep that mindset and to adopt that idea that I can go balls to the wall, or as I like to say and kind of coined a phrase a couple of years ago, my balls out of my purse and just go for it. And I can do that because I know that I'm doing it within a means that's going to allow me to do it over the long term. I'm going
yeah,
to be able to lift really heavy loads, 30, 40, 50, 60. I'm going to be able to do it. I know I am, because I manage the things that I need to manage. And then we look at bands and stuff like that. So when we look at things like bands, now I could go into a rabbit hole on all these subjects, but I'm going to try not to, just down to the fact that I just want to give your listeners a good basis idea of maybe the ideologies that surround these things. So when we look at things like bands, okay, so the main thing that we see with bands are people kind of saying, oh, you're making that exercise easier. That's the big argument. Am I right in saying that a lot of the time?
yeah. Like on my end, like I've trained with so many different guys. Like
Yeah.
the guy who I would think actually is a great proponent of bands is Mr. Arlen Christian McAlinden, and I
Yeah.
trained with him. He loves the bands, man. Like we
Yeah, I've seen Christian outside using the bands, and
yeah. And now he uses,
that,
but he also does like he does it a certain way where it would probably be in line with what you do, man. It would be.
yeah. But the thing is, you don't abandon the value of intensity. You don't. That's not something that when you manage your training, right? I think a lot of the time people seem to think that, okay, I'm going to make sure that this exercise, and again, bands aren't necessarily just for making the exercise safer. I'll get into that now in a second. So let's just say, for the pure basis of explanation, I'm just trying to make this exercise safer in the long term. Okay.
Yeah.
And let's add a band to this exercise. For example, the hack squat, one everyone sees me use bands on. I add a band to this hack squat. That doesn't immediately mean I train like an absolute fanny. That's not what happens. It's understanding the application of that. And a lot of the time it comes from the application in the context of the entirety of the program that you're doing, the relevance of using these bands. So you'll often see me kind of go through different training cycles using and not using bands. A lot of the time that comes from the load that I'm placing on the joints across the long term, and just on the way that I'm kind of stimulating those tissues within different ranges. So let's look at a hack squat, okay? So we know within a hack squat, for the most part, like every other squat, you're weakest at the bottom end of that range, within that lengthened position of the quad. So we know that when the knee is as flexed as it can be, we're weakest. We can produce the least amount of force. And the best way to kind of understand that is if you think about, okay, what part of a hack squat, well, actually, you're probably likely stronger within that kind of lengthened to mid position, but we won't get into that too much specifically. So the best way to understand that is if you were in a hack squat, what position could you spend the most amount of time in? It's likely that mid to bottom end, you know, that kind of way. Because in the top end, sorry, pardon me, in the top end, because you could sit in the top end of a hack squat all day. You know, you wouldn't actually have to do anything. So that's kind of how you can base off the word stronger. So we know that we're strongest in that top position, i.e. we can tolerate more load in that position. When we're dropping down to the bottom, we know we're getting progressively weaker as we get to that end range. We know we can tolerate less load, i.e. produce more force within that position in order to move that load. So what we're doing when we add the bands, and these bands need to be relevant. You can't just throw any band on it. That's why I don't like people using those big fucking heavy orange bands, because that's just too much most of the time. So using a well-placed green band, potentially 2 purple bands generally works. But again, it's also going to be relevant to the load that you're using. So again, we can get into that later on down the line. So as we get down to the bottom end of that movement, we're weakest. Okay, we can produce the least amount of force. So what that band is doing, that band is alleviating some of, not all of, like some people seem to make it out to be, some of the load at the base end of that movement in order to balance that movement. So what you're doing is you are balancing what's called the resistance profile to the strength profile. The resistance profile is the way the machine exerts load, and the strength profile is the way your tissue produces force. So where you are producing the least amount of force, or you have the least capacity to produce force, you are moving the least amount of load. Least. And it's relevant because you're likely going to be moving more load than you would if you didn't use the band throughout the whole movement. As you come up through the top of that movement, the band starts to alleviate the tension it's providing as you get stronger. Therefore, the load that you're tolerating where you're strongest becomes more. And that is what the whole basis of balancing the resistance and the strength profile is all about. And where we seem to kind of not really bridge the gap is because you get that, you're making that exercise easier. But if you ask anyone who actually uses these bands, you will find that the total amount of load they place on the machine is always more with the use of the bands, well-applied bands, than it is without them. And they always fail within the same place that the tissue is not being able to produce as much force or produces the most. So you're failing in the right places. Therefore, the question can be asked, are you creating a better exercise that way? And in my opinion, you are. Because you're failing where you're supposed to fail. And we all know that despite your higher volume use, your lower volume use, I don't care what kind of training volume you use, failure is almost essential in order for you to get to where you want to be. We can look at reps and reserve and stuff like that, but in my opinion, that is not the most applicable means of training. It's just in my opinion. And when we look at that, okay, it's like if we need to fail in the right place, we're loading the tissues in the right place, and we're achieving both of those things, are we not potentially creating a better exercise? And I personally think that the answer is yes. And that applies for when you're not just reverse banding an exercise, when you actually add additional load to an exercise, like a leg press, for example. A lot of times you'll see people use banded leg presses and nobody bats an eyelid because you're making that exercise harder at the top, okay? But when you look at the hack squat, you're doing the same thing. You're making it harder at the top, but easier at the bottom. And on the leg press, when you add bands, you're making it harder at the top and easier at the bottom. It's just flipped the other way around. It's the same. It's the same idea, but all of a sudden, because you're taking load away, it's like, what the fuck, you know? And I think that's where people kind of, this paradigm, you know, and anyone who tries to tell you about these things kind of comes across as a prick. So I can kind of understand why people don't really listen to it, because I always find that a lot of the time when people are trying to tell you about their means of training and how they go about things, they kind of come across as kind of like downtrodden, you know? I think, in my opinion, I think everyone is doing it right, but I think there are ways we can understand it to do it better, you know? And I guess that's kind of where my and then the same kind of idea applies to when people see me do, or anyone who kind of trains the way I do or has the same kind of similar thought process to what I do. Like reverse banding, like a Smith machine press, where you would see the band kick in at the bottom and it would kind of alleviate itself at the top. It's the exact same idea. Yeah, it is, because we're weaker in that position, and we're weaker because the distance between the load and the joint is furthest. So we've got something called a moment. So the moment arm in its simplest definition is the straight line distance of a load to its joint that's acting upon it. So in this case, if you were using like a dumbbell press, the moment arm is the distance between the dumbbell and the shoulder. As you get to the top end of a dumbbell press, the distance of that dumbbell to the shoulder joint is minimal. As you get down to the bottom, it's very far away. And it's the straight line distance, so looking down on top of somebody. And the reason you're weakest in that is because of the distance from the joint, the distance of the load to that joint, etc. So that's kind of what we're looking at when we're talking about that kind of thing. And it's that basis of understanding that kind of builds the framework of what we do. And unfortunately, what we're finding is people who don't really understand what they're talking about are using these kind of training modalities, and that's what's giving people these negative looks and these negative ideas around it, because it takes a good basis of understanding to apply this training. And if you don't understand it, you are likely not doing yourself any worse off, but you're not probably taking yourself any further than you can be, you know? So that's kind of where I think a lot of the negative feedback comes from it. And I kind of get it. Like, I don't really support isn't the word. If I didn't have a really good understanding of this training, I wouldn't do it.
I get
you. But I do feel that it's valuable for everyone to have a good understanding of it. You know, that's kind of where I suppose the fine line is kind of drawn, you know. So hopefully that kind of explains things a little bit better. And what else? I'm trying to make sure I'm missing everything. I hope that's clear. I hope I'm not confusing anyone.
That's brilliant, man. Because like what I've seen now is like when you get somebody who has the knowledge, or they're a bit of an advanced trainer, like they've done all the basic stuff. They've tried and tested it, and they want to make things a little bit more efficient. It's efficient training. It gets you the results without the harmful parts of getting the results. But
it's not even so much about it being harmful at all. Like, it's not about there is the element of the fact that you are managing joint forces, and that's what I was talking about.
That's what I'd be on about.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important element as well. But I think on the basis of what you're doing, you're essentially making the exercise harder, not easier.
Yeah.
Because you're making it do what it wants. So another idea, you're kind of getting the most out of the least. Yes. And I personally feel like because hypertrophy works on an effort-based U-curve, that kind of way. Like, the more effort you give, despite what you take, you are going to get results. Effort is the commanding kind of driver of hypertrophy, which is why you have genetic freaks who do like 600 reps a set, like just growing like weeds, because they're giving it absolute effort, And then obviously we can't disband the fact that like exogenous hormones and stuff like that come into play, but that's not something we need to talk about at all. But effort is the commanding, pusher of hypertrophy-based responses, and then when you are looking at the management of joint forces, right, I think a lot of the time you get that idea of saying, okay, I'm managing the joint forces, but then you'll often have just train hard, you'll have that as the returned argument. But I think when you give people like, why are you managing that joint force? And then you tell them it's like, because I want to be able to train as hard as I can for as long as I can. There's only so far you will get in 10, 15, 20 years training without an understanding of this kind of thing. And it doesn't even need to be an understanding. It just needs to be a relative awareness before things start to bite you back. This is why you see so many injuries happening. I personally believe that the range of injuries that we're seeing within kind of, I don't want to say aging bodybuilders, that sounds terrible. Like, bodybuilders who have kind of come out of their competitive career and they're starting to get a lot of these injuries is from the intensity of their training. And I'm not saying to abandon intensity. I'm saying to manage it. And that's kind of where I'm getting at. That's my argument to the whole thing, is not to abandon these ideals, because I can't wait until I get back into off-season mode and I can train like an absolute animal again, But I'm not going to abandon the ideals that I know are part of kind of the physiological and the mechanical nature of how tissue works, And I think having an understanding of these things, as I said, my role isn't to abandon the ideals of what make a meathead, because I'm a meathead, I'm an absolute meathead at heart.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
But I'm a meathead who wants to understand how things work a little bit more,
Yeah. No, that's great, man. Like, that pretty much sums up. Like, I've nothing because like all I was gonna repeat was, I was just gonna repeat that. What you went into there, I was gonna say that, but no, I think the main issue. I think the main issue, is like you probably see this in Southside. Beginners hop into the advanced stuff a bit too quickly. I think it's like the log books are great. Like, my whole method's on log books. I log it in my head. I've never used an actual book, but I do log it. It's like I would go into each session and I'd go, okay, I need to beat this in a certain way, but I'd only log my main sets, and it would only be a couple of the exercises, so the power exercises, as I like to call them. And then the other, once the workload stuff is done, I don't really log after that. But like, I
Would
log.
you would you be willing to, as an experiment, start logging your training as specifically as you possibly can,
Oh, I'm
as an
going.
experiment?
Yeah, I'm going to go on ahead on my weaker body parts, mainly because like when I compete next, it's gonna be. I just want to improve, man. I've gone to the point where I'm not stagnation, but I really should be. In my head, I should be bigger. I should be stronger. I should be heavier.
Well,
So I'm like, the only
I
way
think a lot.
I
Yeah,
need to
I
force
think a
it.
lot of yeah, I think a lot of the missing links between, like, and I don't want to say the word isn't kind of, it's not an unwillingness, but I think if you were to go right, and a lot of people are going to be listening to what you're saying as well seasoned bodybuilders who kind of had their come up within the time where it was hardcore to the max, go at it, which is still the mindset that I feel is needed to be a high level athlete. You know, I
Mm,
still feel that that is the way you need to think. However, I think now that we know the value in logging your training, in understanding volume, in understanding intensity. You know, when you touched on like kind of relatively new trainees jumping in and using the kind of more advanced stuff first, I think the basis by which you should push your level of understanding is your awareness and your ability to really reach high intensities in the basic movements within a
mm,
single set. You can do one all out balls to the wall set and carry yourself from that position. I think you're going to be in the best spot. Now, this is going for somebody who is trying to be a high level athlete and who happens to be
yeah,
kind of walking to the gym for the first time. Because I do feel like if somebody is listening to this, between this conversation between myself and yourself, they're likely trying to get into that space. Let's be realistic
yeah,
about it. And I think the best thing for you to do as somebody who's new to being a relevant, or pardon me, as a relatively new trainee, is to go in there. I think it's important to be diligent with your login, be diligent with your ability to understand how you're progressing, and be diligent in your ability to reach a high level of fatigue kind of relatively early on. And it might seem kind of counterintuitive to bring somebody who's new to training to failure. But a lot of the time you'll hear the advice, okay, you're new to training, go 2 reps shy of failure. They have no fucking idea what failure is. You
yeah,
know? I know for a fact if I had a new person in the gym and I said, okay, go do a set to failure, they'd be like, what the fuck is failure? Have you ever brought somebody to true failure? It's horrible. You know? And I think being able to bring people to failure and do it early within a single low volume approach, maybe within
yeah,
a stable environment like a machine. And people often obviously have downtrodden ideas on machines, but at the end of the day, that idea of force and torque being the only thing your body knows stands true as a fact. And
mm,
nobody's going to be arguing with me on that, you know, because your body doesn't know. Your body can't tell. Your body doesn't understand, you know. So if you're able to learn from the onset how to reach high levels of intensity relative to your experience, so your level of intensity might be 12 reps, mine might be 6, 4, 3, 15, 20, it depends. But if you learn how to go and kind of expose yourself to those kind of high threshold and that high close proximity to failure in a lower volume approach, your basis and your foundation to build upon that, and do that with the basics of machine-based movements, you're going to be putting yourself in a really good position to start progressing early on, like a really good position, you know. So I think that's definitely something that people need to be aware of,
yeah.
and to not downshot on it. You know, it's all good. I hope that clears up what we're talking about. So I went on a bit of a tangent there. I think it's because I
No,
was asked that, but
100%.
that's all good. Yeah, let me know if I go off the radars. It's because,
As I
man,
said,
honestly, I get so excited when talking about this kind of
yeah,
thing.
but
It's so stupid, I do.
as I said, man, like, look, the passion behind it is real. So obviously,
Yeah.
but that I love that. I love that. But will we get to some of the questions anyway, my man? I can.
Yeah, man, let's go. So the first one I said I'd get over early, purely because it's not my speciality to understand. However, this person was listening to my Q&A last week and just asked me to go over it again. So at least we're going to guarantee, at least we have one listener guaranteed. So last week in a Q&A, I was asked how testosterone works. Now, this person was relatively young, so I assumed that they meant endogenous testosterone, okay? They didn't mean
Yeah,
exogenous. Now, I touched on exogenous' relevance to this whole thing. So I'll just briefly touch on it again. I want to really quickly clarify that anything I've learned in relation to any kind of pharmacology and anything to do with drugs has come with work that I've done. People like Dean St. Mart, Callum
yeah,
Raystrick, and obviously people who I've worked with in the past and stuff like that have taught me these things, and I've gone and done the research myself. I have zero qualifications. I am not telling anyone what to do, how to do, or even I'm not even claiming that what I'm saying is perfectly right. Okay, I just want to put that out there first. Right, so endogenous testosterone, okay, so any general hormone production starts within the brain, okay? Testosterone starts within the HPTA, which is your
mm,
hypothalamus in your brain, okay? So your hypothalamus produces what's called GnRH. You might know that as gonadotropin releasing hormone, okay? And that is released and acts upon the anterior pituitary gland, so that's another
yeah,
part of your brain. And from there, your pituitary gland produces two hormones, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone.
Yeah.
Those two hormones travel throughout the bloodstream down to the testes and the relevant blood vessels around that area. You have luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. And you'll know those from people who are doing like things like PCTs. You'll know people that are doing kind of post-cycle therapies that are kind of restore the balance of those things. And what follicle stimulating hormone's role is it goes off and it reacts with things called Sertoli cells. And Sertoli cells are responsible for spermiogenesis, which is the creation of sperm. We put more relevance to luteinizing hormone. And luteinizing hormone reacts with what are called Leydig cells. And Leydig cells react with luteinizing hormone to create testosterone. From there, testosterone is released into the bloodstream to go and carry out its relevant functions in its relevant cells, be it the liver, be it the skin, or for what we're probably most concerned about is muscle tissue. Yeah. So imagine we've got testosterone floating through the bloodstream and it meets a permeable and relevant cell. All right. So in this case, it's going to be a muscle cell. It permeates the cell wall. And from there, you get what's almost like a taxi, a carrier protein or an androgen receptor meets that testosterone and it carries it to the nucleus of that cell. From there, when it gets to the nucleus, it goes straight in and it joins with DNA, the oxyribonucleic acid you know from school. And essentially, it joins to the relevant gene of action. And then that cell carries out the action that's relevant to that. So in this case, it's going to be the production of muscle tissue or muscle protein synthesis. That's a really, really basic progression of where testosterone is coming from the brain to the balls to the bulge. And that's kind of where we're going from and we're understanding it. Now, again, people listening to this will probably already know this information or likely to want to understand, okay, I'm a meathead. I'm likely using supplements. Where does the exogenous end come into this whole equation? All right. So essentially, when you use exogenous testosterone, you just inject testosterone or whatever you digest it in like an oral or something like that, and it goes directly into the bloodstream. It bypasses that HPTA, anterior pituitary, bloodstream, the testes. Boom! It just goes straight into the bloodstream. No messing. So the issues then you might find with that and the relevance you have is you bypass what's called your hormonal feedback mechanism. So your brain will stop producing enough of whatever hormone based off the natural. So if you have enough natural testosterone, which we know is very hard to increase and bring down, we know your natural testosterone is pretty much just where it is. It's not going anywhere. That's due to something called the feedback loop. Your brain recognizes when it has too much testosterone and will stop the production of the relevant hormone to keep that the way it's supposed to be. And when we use exogenous hormones, we just bypass that totally. We just say, fuck you, brain, boom, gone, straight in. So I guess the main point for you to understand is when do we end up getting that thing that's so common in bodybuilders, like HPTA shutdown? The volume of use that you would use, the volume of drugs that you would use, essentially just tell your brain, here, I don't really need you anymore to do what you're usually doing because I have exogenous testosterone to use in of itself. You know, like exogenous testosterone at the same level your natural testosterone would be, i.e. cruising, you know, we blast and we cruise, is kind of a very similar processes. I mean, you actually look into the kind of validity and the health implications of TRT, which is kind of like obviously mimicking your natural levels with an exogenous use. Yeah. It's all good. You know, there's not many negative health implications when you're doing it right. It's obviously when you're in super physiological doses for an awful long time where things kind of start to pull back the other direction, you know. But that's a very, really basic explanation of how these things can work and the relevance that you might be looking at when it comes to the people who are listening to this. Again, can I please reiterate, I am not in any way qualified to speak about what I just spoke about. I'm not advising anyone. I'm purely just answering the question for that specific listener because I happen to know a little bit about it. There's a lot more going on within that process from the brain to the balls to the bulge that I haven't even touched on. Not because I'm not saying it, but because I don't understand it. That's what I'm not. As I said, and I always say, I'm never going to claim to be anything I'm not. Yeah. But that's a very basic rundown of testosterone production and potential relevance to exogenous use. Once that's not too, once we don't have to be on too QT with that, which I'm sure we don't. It's a podcast.
Definitely. I mean, my only take on that, to be honest with you, is like it's same as yourself. I'll just add one or two things for the listener.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got more experience here than I do ever. So
only because look, I was in a very weird position when I started taking gear. I was 18 years old. There was no natural feds. It only started. There was only one natural fed, and it was in the north. And then obviously, the NBFI started in 2013, but I had already decided to prep for NABA. So I started, but my whole mindset behind taking, you know, external hormones was literally for competition. I would never recommend it if they're not competing in any form of untested. you
Yeah.
can be in an unlucky position where it can shut you down afterwards, which is, you know,
Yeah, big time. And
and I mean,
funny enough, and it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world if they do. Like, I'm not saying that your natural testosterone being shut down is a good thing. Like, it's never a
no,
good thing. There are ways of getting around it. And again, I don't even want to talk too much at length about this because I'm not qualified to do it. But I would definitely advise, if you are somebody who's listening to this who's potentially worried about that kind of thing, maybe potentially you've taken a step too far and you feel like, okay, maybe you've gone to the point where I don't think I'm going to get my natural HPTA function back. Don't panic. There are ways around it. Maybe you're looking to have kids. Maybe you're looking to kind of get back to some relative normality. Maybe you've hung up the trunks, for lack of a better term. There are people out there who will be able to help you do that, both from a medical perspective, and there's people like Dean St. Mart, who is an incredible mind. He's unbelievable. I don't know if anyone watching this maybe has current positions on who that guy is and what he's like, but I can guarantee you, despite what you think of Dean as a person, he is an incredibly educated guy, and
yeah,
he's amazing. You know, like,
right,
again, and my own experience in that end of things, you know, my own experience in exogenous use is last April, as I told you. I know I was kind of chatting to you about that kind of thing. Is I decided that I was going to go down the anabolic route, and I started my first cycle. I used 300 milligrams of testosterone enanthate, and I used it for 12 weeks. Came off for 12 weeks. Went up to 400 milligrams. I took very much the kind of low dose, most out of it approach. But then, unfortunately, I got really sick in October, and that ended up coming to bite me on the arse. It was non-related to the hormones I was using. It wasn't a related thing at all. I had something very unfortunate and sudden happen to my immune system, but that's
yeah,
neither here nor there. And I'm in a position whereby the word isn't like excited to utilize these hormones again. I'm very much excited to get back into off-season mode again. You know,
yeah,
I'm back in training and bodybuilding mode again, because that's obviously where I am looking to get to in my own kind of space. But yeah, I would definitely, it's kind of to stop going off on a tangent again, is definitely, if you are somebody who's watching this who feels like maybe you've taken a kind of a step too far, there are people out there, and I'm not that person. I'm not that person to talk to, and that are able to kind of help you in that capacity. You know, that kind of way, be it from a medical
yeah.
point
It
of
can
view.
all, like, I think people's main issues with it, like, especially like I'm in a position now where I will blast and cruise. Okay, like I'm the
Yeah.
only time I'm gonna come off at this point is if I want a baby. And at that
Yeah.
point, so there is protocols out there, people. So,
Oh,
you know,
absolutely,
there
man.
is certain things to bring up your, you know, it's not rocket science, but you do need to be like don't
Yeah,
ignore it. Don't ignore it. You
you need
want
to
to
be
feel,
willing to get someone else's help. I think that's
yes.
kind of, unless you're in a position to do so. If there are people out there who are looking for that kind of help, I can't recommend Dean St. Mart and Joe Jeffrey enough.
Mm,
Two incredibly educated guys. Joe Jeffrey is over in the UK. Dean is Irish, and I'm pretty sure he's living up north. But anyway, I think what we'll do is we will navigate from this subject.
well, what's
Honestly,
the other
but I do
question?
definitely.
Yeah, no, 100.
Yeah, the other question.
St. Mart,
Yeah,
Dean St. Mart is a great guy. This is a plug for you, Dean. Um, anyone who wants to, you know, just get their hormones back to normal, get functional, get the sex drive back, certain things. He's your man. There is a few other guys I'll recommend at a later date that I would be kind of aware of, but he'd be the main man. But who? Well, yeah. What's the next question
yeah.
there?
So a lot of questions we kind of already got. We kind of already
What?
covered. So somebody asked me about resistance. Someone already asked me about resistance profile management. We already kind of spoke about on that.
Deadly.
The use of cuffs. So that's an interesting one. So cuffs, yeah. So we'll kind of touch on that a little bit. So the use of the cuffs and the relevance of using those guys comes from a couple of different things. So they all kind of revolve around the same idea, which is kind of minimizing the moment arm to the joint, which is kind of changing the distance of the actual load, i.e. in a dumbbell fly, it would be the dumbbell, in a lateral raise, it would be the dumbbell, in the cuff, that would be the load. So the distance that we actually have to keep that load from the joint itself. And that's where that idea comes from. And the potential negatives of having something like a dumbbell fly. And on the other side of that, we can look at resistance profiles and ask ourselves, okay, which one of these is going to give us more bang for our buck? So that's the first thing we'll take again, because we spoke about it already, was resistance profile. Let's ask ourselves, okay, why would a cuff potentially be better than a dumbbell as far as a resistance profile point of view goes for something like a lateral raise and a dumbbell fly? And we'll cover just those today. Sound good? Sweet. So we have a dumbbell fly. So when we look at something like a dumbbell fly, a standard line dumbbell fly, we know, I'm just going to do kind of half of my body here. Dumbbell is in the hand, and we bring ourselves across here. We also know that the direction of the resistance that we're trying to work against is straight down, because the resistance that we're working against is gravity. Okay, we know that for a fact. Gravity works in straight lines. It'll never change. It's always going to be that way. As we push our arm across our body, i.e. the dumbbell, and the moment arm gets smaller, when you think about bringing the dumbbell across your body, think about the moment arm getting smaller, the straight line distance.
Mm.
As we get closer to the direction of the force that we're trying to work with, i.e. gravity, force essentially drops off because we're working on top of gravity. Gravity is on top of the dumbbell. There's not really much all going on. You know, we can hold that there all day, every day if we wanted to. Now, when we use a cuff, generally when we use something like a cuff, we're using it on a cable machine, okay? So the difference between a cable machine and a dumbbell fly is the direction of force. The line of force is going to be pulling you towards the source of the cable, usually within a 45-degree distance that way. So we know that here, we're still getting a substantial amount of force being pulled against there. So we still have substantial challenge in this position. We know when we get to halfway, we're likely to have a bit of 90-degree challenge, which is relevant because we're stronger in that mid-range. We have the strongest force pulling us at 90 degrees. Therefore, that makes sense. As we bring ourselves into that end range, which is normally where the dumbbell would drop off tension, we maintain tension. And not only do we maintain tension, the angle at which that force begins to pull us is relatively acute compared to the angle of the actual arm, which means that it drops off in the right place, but not so much that we have none. So when we look at that, we're like, okay, cool. We can actually manage the resistance better across the totality of the movement, meaning that we can likely get a lot more out of a lot less, which means that we can work a hell of a lot harder within what we're doing. So we can get to push that intensity. We can work harder. We can be meatheads more. Then we look at it from a joint force point of view. When we look at the moment arm again, which is again going to be a very relevant aspect to understanding why these things are important, we can get back to this position again. We know that the distance between the dumbbell and our arm is relatively long, okay? We have something called Pell's balance, and Pell's balance is kind of like it's like a formula that you use to calculate the amount of joint pressure on the joint itself. So in this case, the glenohumeral joint, which is the joint that kind of attaches the arm to the shoulder. When you're doing something like a dumbbell fly and you hit this end range here, there's going to be something called inertia, all right? So inertia is the property of mass that makes it want to continue to move through free space unless opposed by an alternative force. In this case, that alternative force is your arm. So we know that we have this massive amount of joint force, and that 2.5 kilo dumbbell isn't 2.5 kilos anymore. Because of Pell's balance, because of force, it's a massive amount of load to place on the tissue.
Yeah.
So unless you can use really perfect form, manage that incredibly well, and you want to work with 2.5 kilo dumbbells, 5 kilo dumbbells, then yeah, okay, a dumbbell fly might be a relevant exercise for you if you know what you're doing and it fits within the totality of your program. But if you want to move sufficient load in a safer environment, a more intense environment, across more a plane of movement and get the most out of you possibly can, it may be an idea to use a cuff in order for you to bring that joint force, in order for you to bring that load closer to the joint itself, be able to handle more load across the plane of that joint, and thus hopefully get more progress, not only literally more progress, but more progress for longer. And the exact same applies for the dumbbell lateral raise, the exact same thing. When you're on that top end of the movement, the distance is super far away. The joint forces that are needed to stabilize that tissue are quite heavy. If you don't really know what you're doing, or if you're doing the traditional kind of meathead lateral raise swing, which has its place, it's in my program right now actually, which has its place dependent, right? You bring it right up to the top, but then if you minimize the distance from that joint to the force, sorry, I think my dad was coming in, you minimize the distance between that load and that joint, then you're likely to be able to not just move more load, be able to protect that joint more.
Yeah.
So like a lot of the time, it's fear of difference. I think a lot of the time when people kind of negate these ideas, you know, it's not what they've always done. So there's this kind of like limitation to go at it. You know, I think that's where a lot of it comes from. But I think when you're really going to get an understanding as to the benefits this likely is going to give you, man, it's astronomical. And I say to, who was I talking to before? I talked to Josh Bridgman over in the UK before, and Callum and stuff like that. And I was saying, I don't think we've seen the caliber of athlete that we can build with this kind of thing just yet. No. This kind of training hasn't been in the mainstream approach long enough for us to see the caliber of bodybuilder that we can be. You know, I'm hoping that I am probably the first Irish bodybuilder who we can see really push that kind of thing, because I'm starting with Callum and May. Not to say I'm going to reach anywhere, but you know the caliber of progression. You know, I'm not looking to come out of this genetic freak. You know, your genetics are always going to be your genetics, but the means by which I can progress, the intensity by which I can use, the frequency by which I can use. I'm hoping to maybe show myself and hopefully prove to myself just how relevant this is to a physique athlete. You know,
are you going to do classic, or are you going to go into open?
Actually, you know, I'd probably get into that as well, because that was the next question. Someone said, when is my own next show? I have no idea. So I start with Callum Racetrick, who is Callum from the Muscle Mentors. So again, and Luke from the Muscle Mentors, and James and Ryan and Alex. They're unbelievable guys, like absolutely incredible. I get on very well with Luke, and then Callum is he's like the physique coach there, and he's an incredibly well-rounded and understanding guy. So I'll be starting with him later on. And for me, I think it's not about when I compete; it's knowing when's the right time. I'll know when I'm big enough. I'm not getting on the stage just to get on stage. Actually, funny enough, to kind of bring up another point, I had some very random kind of like troll profile the other day message me like privately called Diana Ball, very original name. I know, yeah, hilarious. Text me and say, your genetics are so shit, you should just keep up bodybuilding or something ridiculous like that. You know, something stupid. And I think I just use this kind of public. I'm not calling myself a genetic freak or anything like that. I do think I have the capacity to do well, but that's because I think if you don't believe in yourself even a little bit, you're kind of just you're kicking stones, you know. But as far as my own next show, man, I have no idea. I have no idea what class I'll be in. I'd like to do a bodybuilding class purely because I've done men's physique before. I was nowhere near big enough. I wish someone told me to go home and eat myself when I prepped the last time, you know. Like, and I done my first show naturally or half natty, you know. I used to clean in the last 6 or 7 weeks or whatever, but you know, I think now going at this with a more like genuine. Like when I first prepped, my mindset around it was I want to just try this out. And about at the very end of it, I finished it. I was like, okay, this is exactly what I want to do. This is me. This is what I'm into. This is the sport that I've been looking for. This is the sport that's filling the gap of martial arts for me. This is it. You know, so for me, it was about kind of understanding that and kind of getting a hold of that. And I had every intention of actually competing this October. That's when I was due to compete. Like I started my off season last April. And obviously the start of my off season was kind of signaled by the start of my use of exogenous hormones, and I was kind of ready to rock and roll. I'd been getting consultations with Dean. Everything was mapped out for me, like everything. And then I got sick. But that's neither here nor there. And I suppose for me now, it's about getting back in line with Callum, us kind of gauging, okay, where am I at? What's my tissue? Where am I going? What do I have available to me? When's this quarantine going to be over? And then decide from there. But I would really like to do a bodybuilding class because I love bodybuilding. I don't love men's physique. I like men's physique as a sport because it is bodybuilding, but as a class, I love, and classic would be where I'd like to go. I think I'm not going to be big enough for a bodybuilding class anyway, so it might have to be classic. But some of the classic dudes are bigger, and I guess on the other side of it, I just need to see where my shape goes. You know,
I'll give my 2 cents. I'll give my 2 cents. I like personally, my whole take with classic is this. I think it's like it's not necessarily about a weight class, like height to weight ratio. It's about a certain look.
Yeah, exactly.
The guys who are like blessed with that shape and structure are going to win it. But I think your best bet, my take on it, how old? You're 23, 24?
24.
Yeah, you're too old for juniors now. But I was going to say that or do first timers or do first timers.
Yeah, well, the plan for me is to likely go over and do a Two Bros show and do one of their beginner classes, I think.
Yeah.
The UK piss all over this country for bodybuilding. You know, they're all over it. PCA is better over there.
Yeah,
PCA, now in fairness, PCA over here is arguably probably the best show of the year. You know, and NABA's brilliant, always really well run. But for me, it's not really about the show or anything like that. I guess I just need to see, like, it might seem kind of silly as well, like kind of saying, oh, you know what class you fit in, but I don't know what size I can actually get to. I have no idea.
No, you never know.
I never got a chance to really push it. And I have no idea what I'm going to look with that look. You know, the look that comes with the use of these hormones, that comes with the process of this training. I have no idea. I only got 12 weeks in last year, you know, and I made some progress in that 12 weeks. I started to look pretty good, but then I kind of had to get pulled back. I still have no idea what my capacity for growth really is within that time frame. I'd like to be.
I'll tell you what.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
I will, like, personally, when you pick a show, I'll help you out with the posing and all that, like all the stuff that, like, all that kind of stuff, because that's my bread and butter. Like, I do it every day now, even though I've lost a little bit of weight, I'd still do it. Like, I love it. But I think, like, no, I think I love it because at the end of the day, look, it's a personal thing, like, and I think I always say, like, you have to be realistic as well. Like, I've been unrealistic when I've gone into shows and got absolutely fucking destroyed. Now, I've been lucky enough that I have placed quite well in everything I've done, bar 2 shows. In those 3 shows, I came dead last in every single one. In every other one, I came top 3. So it's kind of like, out of 9 shows I came out 8 out of 9, so 9 shows. Yeah, so I got like more than 50%. I've been lucky enough. But at the end of the day, I think if you bring condition, like just come in absolutely peeled out of your mind, you're going to be rewarded for the effort anyway.
That's
It's
the
like,
game plan, man. Like, I'm not putting too realistic hopes in front of myself. Now, I honestly, in the back of my head, there's a little meathead in the back of my head
dude,
who's just saying,
everyone wants to be
"Oh,
Mr. Olympia. Everyone
he's just
wants
saying,
to be
he's
Mr.
just
Olympia.
saying," and anyway, I know, and anyone who says they doesn't is lying. And
Yeah.
he's saying, "Go for it." And you know what I'm going to do, man, is I'm not going to allow myself in 5 or 6 years' time to say to myself that I left the stone unturned.
Mm.
I'm gonna go for it. I really
Love
am
it.
gonna go.
Love it,
And
man.
I'll know. And some of the best bodybuilders who ever done well, they weren't always blessed with great genetics.
No,
Yeah,
no.
if and sometimes you can build on top of a poor frame, and you can, and I don't necessarily have a poor frame. I don't have a poor frame, I don't necessarily have something it's hard to work with, but at the other side of that, I don't know where I'm at with everything. I don't know where I'm at with my potential to look a certain way. I don't know where I'm at with my potential to grow. I've never really pushed it before, and I think until I do that, I won't know.
Yeah.
And
See, like,
I'm
I
more
love
than willing.
I love your take on it because like the whole point is like I only pushed it really hard in 2018,
Yeah,
and that was the biggest I was, full stop. And
yeah,
then I think I got pretty big before the lockdown. I was pretty happy with what was going on. I was gonna ramp it up, but I
yeah,
think people are gonna realize, including yourself and myself, once we're able to go to the gym, we're gonna be able to appreciate that we're able to do normal things like that. Like I can
yeah.
guarantee you the standard of every competition that happens after this is going to be so much better, which is so
Yeah,
much
I think because
great.
people don't want to prep; they'll just want to train.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
all they want to do. That kind of way. It's nuts,
yeah.
man. But
I love but
I love I love bodybuilding. I love everything about it. I love, and for me, it's not about the look. It's all about the progression. That's what it
yeah,
is for me. But now, on the other side of that coin, I think it's realistic for me to think about the fact that progress is in the look. The look is the progress. It's part of
yeah,
that. Now, the main driver for me is getting stronger. That's, oh man, I love nothing more than busting it in a way that, like, I know that what I've done outside of the gym has pushed myself to the point. And when I started last season, last April of my original off season, seeing that progression come from my effort was just like, whoa! I was
yeah.
all over
Oh
it.
yeah, 100%.
I'll be all over it again, and it's transitioned into everything I've done. I was never more focused on my work than I was when I was most focused on bodybuilding. And
Yeah,
that's a really kind of, that doesn't usually happen, but that's what happened to me. Everything was dialed in, everything. I had everything at a certain time because I knew my training was at this time, my meals are at this time, my work was at this time. Even to this day, I have everything I do planned out from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep. Now,
love
funny enough, lately with everything that's going on, that's kind of got it's got the boot a little bit, that kind
it.
of way. And well, for the most part, man, I think the routine of it all has kind of really spread itself into my ideals, and
The routine's
I think
great.
yeah, man, I think a really good message maybe to even kind of start wrapping things up with is just, if you are a bodybuilder, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to be a bad coach, or that you need to have these kind of
No,
limited ideals for yourself, or that you need to have these very stringent methods that you think are working just because Dorian did it or just because X did it. I had a funny joke that went around with a couple of people saying, because I obviously do exercises that are different to other people's exercises for
yeah,
the most part, at least in that space, in this space,
yeah,
and in this country. Over in the UK, a lot of people are doing what I do.
yeah. No, a lot are, man. A lot of good pros, a lot of good athletes.
Have found what I'm doing, not what I'm doing now. That makes it sound like I fucking told them to do it, but in the sense that they're a little bit more ahead of the curve, like that
Yeah,
we are. Like that's going to leak in very, very soon, and which is why I don't mind talking at length and talking quite confidently about all this.
yeah.
It's not a problem. But as I said back at my original point, it's that I think as an athlete, as a coach, and putting all those things together, whatever you do, don't put yourself in one box. You've recently come out of that box where you're like, okay, I think it's time for me to open my ideas. Like, you sent me a voice message. We won't go through the voice message because that was a conversation between us, where in summary you said to me, here, I want to learn more because I've realized that I put myself in a box for so long, and that's a very admirable thing that you've done. And I'm sure that's going to transition you into this idea where you're like, you know what, I'm going to open my own ideals, maintain the values and maintain what a bodybuilder is, and that's somebody who fucking works. But that doesn't mean you can't pick up these ideas and add those to your work. And I
Yeah,
think
man.
that's kind of the main point in all this, is that don't get lost in two separate camps, realize they're both in the same place, and put them together and create something really special, be it with your clients, be it with yourself, be it with your own training, be it with whatever it is that you do. Combine smart and combine hard and put them very much together. And I think in a couple of years' time, we're going to see the results of that very, very clearly. And I hope to be one of those results, fingers crossed.
Oh, for sure, man, for sure. And you know what? Where can people find you? Where can
so anyone, most of the time you can find me acting the bollocks on Instagram. I don't take myself too seriously. When it comes to my work, I take myself very seriously. But on the other side of it, it's all about being a human, I think, at the end of the day. So you can find me acting the bollocks on my Instagram, which is at Ross_Byrne_coach. You can also find me on my website, which is rossbyrnecoaching.com. And if you have any inquiries as far as coaching goes, or as far as any kind of consultation goes, or anything along those lines, just either sling me a DM, throw me a message, or just throw me an email at rossbyrnecoaching@icloud.com.
Savage. Well, look, thanks for coming on to the podcast, man. And look, it was great.
Thanks for having me.
I'd say in future now, I'll definitely, because that was a fairly broad subject matter, like, but I'd say, like, I'd definitely, like, when this picks up a bit more and I get a few more listeners, I'm sure I'll get some more requests. I'd love to chat more.
I'd say the best basis for me to come on. I'd say the best basis for me to come on is when you want to present with something that's very specific.
Yes.
You know, because I suppose that episode went into an awful lot of what I'm thinking about and what I do. And I suppose that was the whole goal of the episode, to kind of get an idea of how I'm thinking. If you wanted to do an episode on the specifics of just exercise order, or on motor unit recruitment, or something like that, you know, things that like are relevant to what maybe are really specific. Because obviously this episode was super broad. So
man.
Let me know if you ever get any questions that are maybe a little bit more in depth.
Sure, dude. I'll have to hop on one of your live yokes.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think me and Grace are actually doing one. I think Grace wants me to go on hers, and she's going to get all the girls to do Q&As, because obviously girls don't ask Q&As as much. It's all kind of about building arses and fucking glue packs and shit.
It's about the Instagram.
I think her plan is to actually put a Q&A where I'm going to run the Q&A within her page, which is going to be interesting. And loads of other things in the pipeline, man. But I think the next big thing for me is going to continue coaching, keep doing my thing. Fingers crossed, start my bodybuilding journey again in the next couple of months. Fingers crossed, and God willing, because I've got a clean bill of health, so all is ready to rock and roll. And kicking and going. Anyway, dude, thank you so much for having me. That was really enjoyable.
Thanks very much, guys.
I did really enjoy it. You're welcome, dude. Peace and love.
All right, so everyone who's listening now, he said his handles there. Check him out. Ross will definitely be on at some point in the future. Thanks for coming on, man. And that is us.
My man. See you soon.